Well, welcome all to the 13th episode of the Botany Bistro. We're very excited to bring you this session today. We're continuing our discussion about plant pathology, and so I invited my coworker and good friend Kaimisha Montgomery to join us today and help us out with a few of the common pathogens that we might be seeing in our gardens throughout the season. But let's just take a little bit of time to review what the Botany Bistro is. So we started doing these free virtual lunch and learn sessions several months ago, and this came out of a desire that I had to stay sharp in my botany knowledge and also give you bite-sized botany pieces that can help you be a better gardener, a better farmer, and just know more about plants in general. And so I don't want to hide this information. It's available to anyone who wants to access it. If you're not able to join us on our live sessions, we do archive all of our sessions online on YouTube and on our website. And so we will keep coming at you every other Friday. I wanted to say that we're coming from the CGC, which is the Civic Garden Center, and we are located in Avondale, which is a neighborhood in Cincinnati, Ohio. This information will apply to lots of areas of the country, though, so if you're tuning in from somewhere else in the country or around the globe, I'm sure you'll get something good out of today's session. We have done other sessions about systematics and taxonomy, anatomy, morphology. Last time we were together, we talked about pathogens that were significant in history, and so it made sense today to continue our discussion about pathogens that we are all kind of aware of in some of our gardens today. We always have something yummy for lunch, and so our lunch today is this wonderful lamb curry. Smells pretty good, I know. This was made by a good friend of mine. I'm very excited to try this. And we have some biscuits. My husband's testing out a recipe that he's trying for Thanksgiving, so I never mind being a taste tester for him. And so we've got some biscuits to go with our curry today. I hope you're all enjoying a wonderful lunch on this Friday. It's actually drizzling outside, which we're thankful for. It's been quite a dry past few weeks this fall, and so those of us that are growing cool season crops, I'm sure are all a little relieved to get some rain today. Today we're going to discuss some common pathogens. We want to go over damping off, powdery mildew, downy mildew, blossom end rot, which actually is not a pathogen, but we're going to include it anyway, fire blight, and we'll leave the last one as a surprise right at the end. When you think about joining us again, put it on your calendar for December 1st. We're going to be talking about plant genetics and breeding. I'm going to be discussing a three-part series then of how genes work, inheritance. We'll kind of brush up on Punnett squares and Mendelian genetics before we go into some of the more modern methods that people are using in that field of botany. Every time we also have a little bit of homework. So last time we were thinking about a plant that we would hate to lose to a pathogen. I think mine is carrots. I love carrots in so many of my dishes. I really appreciate the texture and the vitamins that I get from it. But this week, your homework is to tell us about a pathogen that you have battled in your garden. And please share that with us on social media or Facebook. All right, so without further ado, I'm going to introduce Kaimisha. She is our urban agriculture coordinator. And we've been working together here at the Civic Garden Center for over a year now, and have come across a lot of really interesting people, places, and problems in the garden.
Definitely.
So what we're going to do is we're going to kind of team this up. And so I'll introduce the pathogen, kind of talk a little bit about what it is and how to spot it. And then our expert here is going to tell us what we can do to avoid it. Because it's one thing to be able to identify an issue, and it's another thing to be able to resolve that issue. And so I'm really happy to have the expertise of Kaimisha with us today. So thank you for taking time.
No problem, Mary.
That's awesome. I mean, I'm free biscuits, so.
Can't pass that up. Or curry.
That's true. So let's start off with damping off. This is one that most gardeners probably have some familiarity with, especially if you have tried to grow your own seeds indoors. So here in our region, it's recommended that we would grow seeds in February so that we're ready for planting in mid to early May so that we can get a head start on our growing season. If you don't start your tomatoes and peppers inside, sometimes you can purchase them, or if you do sow outside, you might just be a few weeks behind. And so it's really nice to be able to get that head start. But damping off is a soil-borne disease that affects seedlings, and it causes rotting right at the stem. That's usually where I see it first. And the stem will just like turn into a little nothingness. The seeds will germinate well, it'll start growing well, you're so excited about your seedlings, and then 2, 3, 4 days later, they're all flopped over. And it looks like the part where the stem was touching the soil has just disappeared. And so the signs also could be this little bit of like kind of fluffy white cobweb growth that happens around the stem, or maybe those two early leaves, those seed leaves that are coming from the cotyledons. Now I haven't dug up my infected plants to see what the roots look like, but my research is telling me that they are also usually withered or absent. And so you'll be able to tell pretty quickly that damping off is happening when you're growing your seeds, because they'll just all start flopping over. So why does this happen? We have a few culprits, so there's not one bad one that we can just say, you get out. There are several that will cause this disease. And we have fungal foes and also water molds. And they're prevalent in our soils already. So it's something that we need to be paying attention to in order to be growing successfully indoors. So what are we going to do about this, Kaimisha?
Well, there's certain things that you can do to prevent it, or once it's here, to try to decrease it from just not having your seedlings grow. I would say making sure that you have a good, viable source of sterile soil. If you can't create it, make sure that you're purchasing sterile soil. And if you're, having some issues with the soil that you created, another thing that you can do is try to sanitize your soil, creating an atmosphere where you're increasing the soil temperature. You can do that by putting it inside of a microwave safe bag, and putting it into your microwave for a few minutes, making sure that temperature is increasing to at least about 140 degrees. You can always take the temperature with something that's going to record that. Also, you can either just put it in a clear bag and set it outside on a sunny day, direct sunlight to increase that temperature. But that's one way that you can sanitize your soil. Another thing that you can do is just using hydrogen peroxide is known to just if you do see some of those symptoms of the damping off, if you do see some of those symptoms, then one of the other things that you can do is using hydrogen peroxide in just a dropper, and just putting a few drops onto some of those cells, because it can transfer from cells to the other trays, to the other trays of your seed starting. So it's important to just notice what you have going on, and just being diligent of just putting your eyes on it and seeing if you have any of those symptoms happening on your trays.
So it's not something that like, oh, it's starting, maybe I'll just leave it and it'll get better.
No, it's something to address.
Okay.
Especially you don't want it to just, go over to your other trays also.
Yeah. And I was talking about how I like to recycle pots, and sometimes I save my extra potting soil, and sometimes that can be not the best idea.
Not at all, especially if you're not sanitizing those trays and you're not reusing the soil that you previously had an issue with. So.
Okay, great. Awesome. Well, I'm going to try some of these tips, because I just the other day was trying to grow something in a pot and noticed that my little seedlings came up strong and then fell down just as quickly. The next one we're going to discuss is powdery mildew. And so we're going to discuss two different mildews. We'll talk about downy afterwards, but let's talk about powdery first. So what is it? It is a they. It's not an it, I guess. Many different species of powdery mildew, and each of these species attacks a range of different plants. So that's great news. That's okay, gardening is always an adventure. And so you're going to be looking at this affecting mostly your cucurbits, which are squashes, pumpkins, cucumbers, melons, your solanaceae family, which are tomatoes, eggplants, peppers. Roses can also suffer from this, and legumes, your beans and your peas. You can tell that your plants have it because it looks like someone kind of dusted flour, like you would use for baking, like on top of your leaves. And they're kind of these circular, powdery spots. They can appear on stems as well, sometimes fruit, but typically it's going to be on the leaf surface and on the upper part of that leaf. In a very severe infestation, it could be also on the underside. And in the case of powdery mildew, it's the young growth. It's that new growth that tends to experience this first. The leaves will turn yellow, they could dry out, twist, or break. And then the mildew will start to spread to other spots of your plants and leaves. Now, there is an exception because there's a powdery mildew that affects artichokes, onions, peppers, and that can also produce yellow patches on the leaves. And mostly it doesn't affect fruits, but you can start to see it occasionally on pea pods. There'll be little brownish spots. And so how does it come about? Well, it's brought in by the wind. And so not a lot you can do to say, I don't want you, powdery mildew. But the spores will drift into your garden, and you get new outbreaks from dormant plant material as well. So if you have had an outbreak in the past and you composted that material, or you had that material remain in the garden for any amount of time, you can have those spores reactivate. This one's, it's pretty hardy, so it actually produces a special kind of spore that can overwinter in our gardens. So thanks, powdery mildew. No, I'm just kidding. And so it does require living plant tissue to grow, and so that's where you'll see it mostly, but those areas where we're leaving vegetation out are definitely spots to be paying attention to. And so this one is interesting to me because I usually think of mildews as growing in kind of like dark, damp, wet places. And while there is some need for those conditions in order to increase the growth of this, it can actually continue to grow and germinate in the absence of free water. And sometimes this fungi is actually killed by a lot of water. So if we had like a heavy rain event for extended periods of time, but it doesn't need to consistently stay wet. So having a couple of dry days does not mean that this is going to go away. And the temperature that it likes to thrive in is our prime growing season, 60 to 80 degrees. And it does tend to do a little bit better in shady conditions. Direct sunlight and temperatures over 90 degrees tend to be unfavorable for the growth of this one. But what am I going to do if I see powdery mildew?
Oh my gosh. I think the first thing that you'll want to do is just, like I said before, lay eyes on your plants because it's going to be on the leaves of the plants. Having it in the shade is going to cause can increase the percent that it could happen. So I would say growing these cucurbits, which they're going to love the sun, grow them in direct sunlight. That would be a good thing to do as far as decreasing your probability of this happening. Also, if it does happen and you do see this on your leaves, there's some things that you can spray, like neem oil, some different horticultural oils that you can spray on your leaves, mixing it with a gallon of water, neem oil. You can also put in a teaspoon or two of baking soda into that solution and spraying that on your leaves, and that can help a lot too.
Awesome. Yeah, that's helpful. I feel like I get, just large patches on if I'm growing a pumpkin, and I'm like, oh, it's just on this leaf or that leaf. So if I decide to just kind of selectively trim, what should I do with those leaves?
Oh, definitely don't compost those leaves.
Okay.
That's not something that, like you touched on, it can handle certain degrees, and it can stay dormant over the winter. So it's not something that you'll want to compost in the fall or just adding to your compost. So definitely just discard that and don't compost that at all.
Thank you. Awesome. So now we're going to talk about downy mildew. This is a destructive disease that's caused by an organism and acts differently on different species. So this is fun. Mostly it's going to be on your cucurbits again, and it is a water mold, which is similar to the potato famine blight that we discussed last time, and also damping off, which we mentioned at the beginning of the episode today. There are two main types, one that affects cucumbers and melons, and one that affects pumpkins and squash. So this is one's a little bit different because you can have a very healthy cucumber plant, but then your pumpkins are so sad, and you're like, what's going on? And thankfully, it's not, going to jump necessarily, but you could get two different kinds of downy mildew, and then everything's just, whatever. We love gardening, don't we? It's great.
Never a dull moment.
How can you tell if your plants have this? So this one, the symptoms are going to start to appear on the older leaves. And it's usually during moist weather conditions. The undersurface of the leaf has this downy, kind of blackish mildew on it. Also in severe cases, the younger leaves can be affected. So it's very important, like Hamisha's saying, to just pay attention to what your plants are doing. Be doing those regular checks, looking at both sides of the leaf so that you can catch it early, because once it becomes severe enough to be kind of all over, it's a lot harder. And so in its early stage, the disease will have kind of a pale green lesion, and then it will change to yellow. And the shape of the lesion actually is angular and irregular. It follows the vein. So usually it doesn't jump over the main vein. And so you'll kind of see it form in patches of the leaf because it's not going over that xylem phloem vein that we've discussed in other sessions. So in cucumbers, the lesions continue that angular growth because it's limited by the major vein. But as it progresses, the color can turn yellow or brown. The leaves could even curl up on the edges. And in severe cases, the leaves may look burned. So the way that you can tell the difference between these, if you really want to there's several ways that we mentioned, but if you really want to get scientific about it, get a hand lens out and look really closely. The spores that are on powdery mildew are going to be kind of in white chains. And for this one, the spores of downy mildew are on branched stalks that look like trees. So chains or trees. So I haven't tried this. So I'm definitely going to be probably more excited than I should be when I see it this coming season. Oh my gosh, let me go look under the microscope. So I'll keep you posted on that. These thrive under cool and moist conditions. They can initiate from airborne spores. Again, thank you, wind. But after the establishment of the disease, similar to the other mildew, it can continue to spread even in dry conditions. So it's really important that we're paying attention. What are we going to do?
Oh, similar to the powdery mildew, you can create a concoction with the neem oil, baking soda. You can also add for the downy mildew. What it doesn't like is potassium. You can purchase like potassium bicarbonate from Amazon and mix it into a solution using a gallon of water. Another thing that you can do that's that's pretty much, it's going to work. Something that you might have in your refrigerator right now, milk. Adding milk to a gallon of water and just spraying that. Make sure that you're spraying earlier in the day. Of course, this is a mildew, so it's not something that you'll want to spray in the middle of the day. There's all different things that can happen and how it can damage your plants as far as, just leaving droplets of water on your leaves, and the high sun can cause damage to your plants also. But also, just using that milk and just spraying onto your leaves and in the beginning of the day, that can help decrease some of this mildew on your plants.
That's so cool. Yeah, I've always got milk at home. My kids love to drink milk, so I'm gonna give that a try.
Yeah.
Now the next one is blossom end rot. And so like I mentioned at the beginning, this one actually is not a true pathogen. So I could have cut it out if I was very strict about my Botany Bistro. But this is an issue that I deal with quite a bit in my garden. And so I thought it was an important one to include, and Kamisha agreed. This is actually a physiological disorder. And so this is coming from a nutrient deficiency. And so it's not caused by fungus or mold or bacterium. And so what will happen is the bottom of your fruit, which is where the blossom was, that part starts to get mushy and dark and squishy. It looks like it's just rotting. So it's got a great name, blossom end rot. But it affects mostly my tomatoes, but also peppers, eggplant, squash, zucchini, things like that can also be affected by this. You'll see these water-soaked spots, and then half the fruit could be affected. Sometimes you even have a fruit that looks okay on the outside, and when you cut into it, you can tell that it's been rotted and possibly has some other decay going into it. So it's happened. It's caused, like I said, by a lack of calcium in the fruit. And this could be due to a lot of different things. And so making sure that we're paying attention to which parts of our plants are exhibiting some of these symptoms is very important. Movement of calcium around your plant is regulated. And so plants always want to make sure that they're able to photosynthesize and, have that vegetative growth. That's kind of, okay, I'm going to grow, grow, grow. When ideal conditions are met, that's when the plant is like, okay, I can do reproductive phase now. I can lend some of my extra energy to flower and fruit production. But those things are typically put aside if there is a decrease in the efficiency of photosynthesis and transpiration, respiration, like we've discussed. So we've been thinking about these mildews and how they form this kind of a covering over the surface on the top or on the bottom of the leaf, which limits the ability of that leaf to photosynthesize, gain access to sunlight, and also open its stomata for gas exchange. And so if those things start to be compromised, then the plant will start to say, okay, like I'm going to take energy from another aspect so that I can make sure that my leaves are healthy. So that also happens here with blossom end rot. So you might have a situation where the plant is harboring calcium in its leaves and it's not giving that calcium to the fruits because it's saying, oh no, my leaves are what need this most. And so one of the other causes is too much vegetative growth. So if people are over fertilizing with a lot of nitrogen, that's kind of telling the plant, hey, I want you to grow a lot more leaves. And then those leaves need calcium. And so it's not going to be as willing to share the calcium. But how else can we make sure that this doesn't happen to our plants? What can we do?
Well, like you said, it's about deficiency. So I think the first thing that you can do is have a soil test if that's necessary. You can always reach out to your local extension office and submit some soil to get an accurate reading on what you need to increase in your soil. Lower nitrogen fertilizers is very important. Like you said, you don't want your fruiting crops to think that, hey, we're just going to produce leaves. It's now time to produce some fruit for us. So one of the things that you can do, if it's a calcium deficiency, that good old coffee grinder, you can go ahead and put some, not coffee, because that's high in nitrogen, but make sure you have some eggshells. Clean those out, dry them out, and put them inside of your coffee grinder. And that's a good way to have a soluble fertilizer that's going to really soak up and get to your plant greater in a shorter amount of time than having just those eggshells crushed up. And you have big pieces of eggshells, slow releasing fertilizer, maybe not this year, but maybe the following year. But this is a good way to add that deficiency quickly into your soil.
That's awesome. Yeah, I was going to say I don't drink coffee much at home, but Kamisha said she might loan me one of her grinders so that I can try to get some good tomatoes this year, because it really is a bummer when you see it. A lot of times they'll say, oh, it's uneven watering, and I'm like, I'm doing my best. And so knowing that I can add that calcium boost is really nice. All right, so you've stuck around so far. We've got 2 more. Remember, that last one's a secret. But we are going to mention fire blight. Now, I'm not sure how many of you do orchard growing or have experience growing fruiting trees, but this is a big one for people that are into that field. And so I am a new orchard grower and have already experienced this. So I thought that it was a very important issue for us to bring up. So fire blight is what we're discussing now. It is caused by a bacterium, and it's very destructive of pome fruit trees. So those are your pears, your apples, your crab apples, your quince. There are other things that it will go on to as well. Those are the most common. And this disease can destroy limbs or entire trees and shrubs. You can tell that your plants have it because you will see black. Usually it kind of starts in the open flower, and so the infection site will remain infectious until these petals fall off. So they'll wilt and turn black on pear trees and more of a brown on your apple trees. This infection might be localized, affecting only the flowers, but it could also extend into the branches and the twigs. These small shoots then will wilt and they'll form kind of a shepherd's crook. And so they'll kind of hold on to these darkened leaves, and the stem will be very dark, and so it looks like it's been affected by fire, hence the name. There can also be cankers that grow on the branches and trunks, and they can have a watery light tan ooze. Ooze is one of my least favorite words to say out loud. I'm not going to say it very much. But after exposure to air, that ooze can turn dark. So it does have a different color change. So you really need to pay attention to where this is. Now, I have been researching this, and once your plant has fire blight, it's sticking around. So it's more of a way that you're kind of living with it. But really paying attention to it, getting the infected things out as quickly as possible. It can overwinter. You can tell if it's in your orchard by kind of scraping a top layer of the bark off of the trunk, and you'll see these streaks, these reddish-orange streaks, and that means that the bacterium is being harbored in your plant as it tries to grow. It also can be very easily transmitted. So it's in these flowers typically, and we love our honeybees. We're so happy that they're here. They're very efficient pollinators, but unfortunately they can also be very efficient spreaders of fire blight. Splashing rain and other insects can also transmit it around. It has ideal conditions for infection when nightly temperatures are above 55 degrees. And so it's important to be paying attention to it during our prime growing season. You got any tips for fire blight?
First and foremost, clean your tools. That's a good tip for you there. Clean your tools so that you're not transmitting it from, maybe a tree to another tree or a plant to another plant. But another good way, pruning, making sure that you're not over pruning, but timing of pruning is very important, that you'll want to prune when your plant is dormant. And you can also prune in the summer, and in the fall, early winter is a good time to prune.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah, I feel like there's a lot of things that can go wrong in the orchard, and this was one thing that I was really nervous about, but we've got some tools. Clean tools that we can use. All right, so the last one, I know you're all sitting on the edges of your seats. What is the last one? Should we say it together? Boxwoods. So we decided that we're going to close out the whole boxwood conversation. 2023, boxwoods, go back. But it's something we've all been talking about. I can't tell you a day probably that's gone by since February that I haven't had someone ask or someone mention, or even myself notice that the boxwoods are struggling. And so that's due to several conditions, several reasons. But there are two fungal pathogens that are involved with boxwood blight. And so we're not talking about winter kill. That's something else that also boxwoods are dealing with. And so how can you tell that your plants have blight versus winter kill? So I think that is important, that you can have some tools in your toolbox that you can treat some of these with, but you need to be able to tell what you're dealing with first. And so one of the infections will turn your leaves a light green yellow that transition to bronze and then kind of a yellow tan. This is the Volutella blight. And the fungal pathogen that's involved with this blight can also infect the stems and creates like a loose or peeling yellow bark. So that's kind of the telltale for that one. The other one is a Calonectria. That's as good as that's going to get from me. And so unlike the previous blight I mentioned for boxwoods, the infection has dark leaf spots that form brown blotches. And the initial blight I mentioned can be, the leaves can kind of stay on for a longer time. The second type of blight, the leaves will drop fairly quickly after these brown blotches appear, giving it a very barren appearance. Another key symptom that you can tell one from the other is that the Calonectria is a narrow vertical black streak or cankers developing on green stems, and then the Voltella infected stems having that peeling or loose bark. And so paying really close attention to how the leaves look and how your stems look are going to be important to identifying these types of blights. All right, so why is it here? What's happening? They survive, these fungal pathogens survive on infected plants or fallen leaves from year to year, so overwintering, as we have mentioned before. And so the spores produced on infected leaves and stems can also splash around during rain, watering, wind, again, and can spread these diseases to nearby boxwoods. Environmental stress doesn't help. So drought, too much water, winter injury, all of these things make our plants more susceptible to that pathogen. So what do you think? Boxwoods.
Leave them in 2023. So leave them in 2023. Plant something else. Our horticulturalists suggest planting bayberry, chokeberry, juniper. Planting something like American holly will be some great plants to plant in its place so that you won't have these problems.
Exactly. Well, that was our list. I think a good summary, hearing from you and thinking about some of the other experiences that we've had, is that a healthy plant tends to have less problems. So if we are growing in good soil, if we are taking care to make sure that we're thinning things out so that there's enough, wind that, good wind without pathogens, that there's good ventilation, just taking that time to catch something early, cleaning tools, adding biodiversity to our gardens with native plants and plants that will attract good critters, nice bugs that we like to have, is going to give us a good head start.
Definitely. You touched on some very good points. Making sure that there's good airflow to decrease all the powdery mildew or downy mildew, and then planting directly in direct sunlight. Applying some of the different oils at certain degrees. You don't want to apply it over 90 degrees outside. Just being proactive and laying eyes on your plants are some good ways or good tools to try to decrease some of these things from happening so that you can have a good harvest this year.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Kamisha.
You're welcome.
And so we're going to go ahead and open up the chat to all of you. I want to thank you so much. And just a reminder before I forget, December 1st, we're talking about plant breeding and genetics right here on the Bistro. Same time, same place. So